hard to follow all this morning's talk, so I wanted to focus a little bit about some of the interesting inflection points I'm seeing in terms of how old power and new power are coming together. And I kept trying to look for the right word for this, because in Turkish there's like a perfect word to describe when old and new stuff come together. And I couldn't really find one in English. And I thought maybe I could just get famous using Turkish words and pretending they're untranslatable. But probably syncretic is the best word I'm looking for, because what's happening often reminds me of my discovery of how Latin American Catholicism was really not what I had learned in Europe, or what I've seen of Catholicism, because it's this really mix of indigenous traditions and the Catholic Church kind of coexisting. So it's all one system. They're amalgamated in some sense, but you can see the distinct parts working together. You have all sorts of new ways of power that wouldn't have occurred without one or the other. And this is our famous Lady of Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe. And if you look at the images, there are a lot of indigenous, pre-Christianity symbolism going on to this, as well as the, obvious image of the Virgin. And depending on how you look at it, this is how Latin American Catholicism often works too. You have, lay people leading church in ways that probably would not be recognizable to many people in traditional, say, European Catholic churches. So this is kind of what I'm thinking. And I will talk about one aspect of the system, and I'm just going to sort of, I've learned that it's best if I just start by giving away what I'm going to talk about, and try to go from there. And I want to say I'm the only person using a PC. Everybody else is Mac people, and it's kind of a hint. I usually normally run statistics and zero inflated Poisson regressions and blah, 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 but I'm not going to show any of that. I went through my presentation and took out most of the words and numbers. But to keep this, after watching the Ignite talks, I was like, okay, mine is not going to work. And I'm an academic, and I tell people usually if our presentations are bigger than 12 points, we won, because our standards are pretty low on that. But yesterday's talks were so great, I said, okay, I'm just going to try to not do one of those. But I want to talk about how we have these old and new forms of focusers acting. And I'm going to talk about this in the case of how it's working in social movements and the Arab uprisings, and give a couple of examples from there. By focusers, I mean things that make us look at something. And Becky was talking about this problem, and everybody was asking Wael about the same problem. And of course, the Wael's most linked things that Ethan was talking about, it's the same issue. Because if anything, what social media does is create an enormous influx of information, visual stuff, and you didn't really need to wait for social media. Even 20 years ago, there was already too much. 100 years ago, there was already too much. Smart, because British accents make us think of that. And he was, living his life, doing what he was doing, successful business, when the uprising in the other Arab countries also spread to Syria. And he started acting anonymously, pseudonymously, as a spokesperson. So he was getting interviewed by NPR, he was getting interviewed by BBC, all sorts of very key traditional focusers. That kind of goes back to Ethan's point about bridge people, but a lot of bridge people like Rami don't tweet in both languages, don't speak in both languages. What he does is he exclusively tweets in English, but takes his content from the Arabic world, from Syria, where he knows. So he's doing this in Syria, and you can imagine it's pretty dangerous, and he's hoping and trying not to be discovered, but he was discovered. And lucky for him, somebody called him and said, run. So somebody on the inside, whoever discovered him, there was somebody sympathetic within that organization who called him and said, are you Alexander Page? And he said, yeah, I am. Because if somebody is asking me, they know. And he said, run right now. So he grabbed his 9-month-old daughter, and at the time 6 months, and his wife ran to Lebanon, probably like within an inch of his life. If he was like half an hour late, there would be he wouldn't be alive, quite likely. So he escaped to Lebanon, and then he went to Cairo, where he's now in exile. And there's a lot of cases of people like him that I've seen. I know Bahrainis in Cairo. I know Egyptians who went to Tunisia during the uprising. I mean, there's a network of people who are going around. I mean, even though there are some linguistic barriers, it's not like Arabic's just the same language. He's also active in Egyptian now protests, and you'll see him in Tahrir, but mainly he acts as a reporter, a bridge that people have known to trust. So December 10th, he's traveling to Qatar for a conference that's organized partially by a university, I believe, but it's something that should be no problem. He's traveling there, where I see this tweet. This is, and it says, "I've been stopped in Doha airport, and I'm told I'm not allowed entry, and they will get me on the first plane to my homeland, which is Syria." Now, I don't know how many of you are non-American citizens, but if you travel like me with a Turkish passport, immigration, the border is a no man's land legally very often. In fact, if you follow the case of Jacob Applebaum, even for an American citizen, it can be a no man's land. The laws there are pretty different. And you will have an immigration officer who has pretty much absolute power over many decisions. It's not, you don't really have due process even in the United States the way you would expect, let alone in Qatar. So what happened was, even though he had and supposed to have, and he's invited, by pretty big entities in Qatar, some immigration officer is looking at this and saying, you don't have stamp number blah 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 on your blah 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 blah, because that's how immigration officers work. But according to the international legal framework, if you are deported from your country, from some other country, you get sent back to your country of origin. You don't get sent back to where you came from. You're a Syrian national, you get sent back to Syria. So this was his second tweet, where he's really frustrated and saying, don't send me back to Syria, send me back to Egypt, fine. I mean, I don't have to attend your conference, but I cannot go back to Syria. And the immigration officer saying, according to rule number 5730,000 here, blah, 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 we're putting you on a plane to Syria. You're Syrian, that's where you go. He's stuck. So at this point, we panicked. I mean, a bunch of us who knew him were following this. We started this, so a lot of people started discussing, what can we do? What can we do? Because it means Irani's in Qatari immigration. And it's middle of the night in Qatar. What do you do? So there was a lot of attempts to try to contact, there were people contacting the US Embassy. Well, what's the US Embassy going to do? Wait till the morning and maybe call some Qatari official who's going to blah, blah, blah. By then, he's going to be in Syria. And we won't even have time to have a free Rami hashtag because he's just going to be dead. It's so clear that, because he's so outspoken, he's so well known, that's not going to happen. So there's like, I couldn't really get I had like a screenshot. This is not it. But there were like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tweets, people trying to figure some stuff out. So we had basically a syncretic problem, right? We had a 20th century problem. It's a Kafkaesque bureaucracy, sending somebody to certain torture and death. And these things can get funny. We have this 21st century network mostly operating through Twitter, because if you want speed, it's really good. And we don't do this usually. I've been involved in a couple of things like this, and you try to do this on Twitter, because if you do an email, there's a lot of replication and duplication. If you do it on Twitter, everybody knows what you're doing, so you don't have to then explain to people, okay, somebody contacted the US Embassy, you guys can back off that. It's a nice coordinating tool. So it turns out, though, we needed a 17th century solution. We needed a sheikh. We really needed a sheikh. It turns out that sometimes to solve the 20th century problem, you need your 21st century network to grab a sheikh. And I mean, like, a sheikh. So this is Shakib, who's also in Lebanon. He's a Syrian. And he said, I knew what was happening at this point, because we were having back channel discussions too, but he's like, all right, people, he's in safe hands, influential people are handling his case. Now, if you don't know him, you wouldn't know from his follower count that it was taken care of. But our network knew what was going on. So we calmed everybody down saying, okay, you're fine. Because at the same time, we got Al Jazeera English, we got Al Jazeera Arabic, we got CNN reporters, we got lots of people on the case. But none of those people can get him out of being sent back to Syria. They can make a story about him, and it'll be this touching story about the dead guy with a 9-month-old baby. That's not what we want. It turns out we really needed a sheikh. And this is kind of the image I have of the sheikh. It turns out this is a real sheikh. Or maybe like this, I don't know. I mean, this is what sheikhs do in my, because I might be a Turk, but I got my Orientalist side. I did not think of a camel because everybody always asks me, like, do you ride camels in Turkey? I'm like, I've never seen a camel except once in my life, and that was in a tourist speech, because tourists think there are camels in Turkey. Because the camel cigarettes have camels. It says tobacco from Turkey and it's a picture of a camel. Well, there are no camels in Turkey, and the camel tobacco comes from Bulgaria. But, so I didn't look for camels. But probably the sheikh we got rode to the airport in a Rolls Royce, because what happened was our network found someone who had the connection and the guts to call a sheikh in Qatar in the middle of the night, right? So somebody called a sheikh in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., woke him up and said, well, I don't know what he said. I mean, I have a conversation in my head that goes like, dude, we need you, but probably not. I don't know. I haven't talked to a sheikh, but it's probably something like, I'm really, really sorry, really sorry, but we need you. Our sheikh are sympathetic to the cause and realizing there's no other way we're going to get this resolved before the morning otherwise, probably got one of his, I don't know what he was driving, and went to the airport and plucked him. I mean, he just told the immigration bureaucracy people, all right, move aside. And the 20th century bureaucracy crumbled before the 17th century power, and he plucked him out of immigration. And he's out, right? So he was able to get out and even got an apology for it. So instead of, the sad story about the guy with the 9-month-old daughter who got deported and killed, that would have been a touching and horrible story. I get to tell kind of like after it's done. So this was what happened. Now, I want to sort of highlight something here, right? The 21st century network thing worked till we got to the last mile, and we needed somebody to go make that phone call, to wake up that sheikh, to connect us, to hook us to old power. And a lot of times, when I'm seeing sort of new media-based activism become politically powerful, it's when it hacks the system so that it can hack into the old powers to channel them or to distribute them or to use them in ways that wouldn't have been possible, say, 10 years ago. So there is a new game in town. There's a new player in town in some ways, but it's sort of amalgamating into an old game. So I want to talk about 2 cases of the last mile problem. And I just sort of added this out. I talked to lots of people yesterday, and I decided I would talk a little bit about the hot dam last mile problem. And this is a visualization. There's Gilad. This is a social flow. They really do neat visualizations and analysis of a lot of sort of key political moments that we wouldn't otherwise get. And Gilad's nice enough to blog about them. And I... what's the word? Cite them? Steal them? I cite them all the time in my presentations. This is a case. Do you guys remember when bin Laden was assassinated? There was an announcement that the White House was going to make an announcement at 9 o'clock on a Sunday. And it was really weird. What on earth are they doing 9 o'clock on a Sunday? And there was this huge discussion on Twitter. And I don't think, did I pull his, oh, I didn't pull his tweet. Maybe I can show it to you guys live now. Keith Urban, who is a former aide to Rumsfeld, got on the phone with probably Rumsfeld and learned what had happened. Let me show you his tweet. You can probably find this on, yep, see, there you go. So he tweeted this. Now, you see this tweeted like 100 million times now, but at the time, Keith Urban had how many followers? A couple thousand? Less, maybe 800, I think, something like that. So he was not a big guy on the network. He's just somebody. But see, the thing is, he was being followed by Brian Stelter, who is what I call this curator power, like Andy Carvin. These are people who are watching people who are probably watching people, right? And because Brian Stelter was following him, Brian Stelter was following Keith Urban. In this visualization, what you're seeing is it looks like Keith Urban got retweeted a lot, and Brian Stelter, who's a New York Times reporter, retweeted that thing a lot. But this is a little misleading if you look at it this way, because it's kind of spatializing it. If you look at it temporally, and there's a nice visualization of that too, thank you. It's great when you don't have to do all the work and other people do these things for you. So this is again Gilad's visualization. What you see is the web is buzzing with, is it Gaddafi, is it bin Laden, is it Gaddafi, is it bin Laden? So the blues are bin Laden, reds are Gaddafi, and until this moment, it's like going head to head. Keith Urban tweets that, and he's got 800 followers and not too many people are following him. Brian Stelter, who is a reporter, says, wait a minute, this guy's Rumsfeld chief of staff, I believe. So this must be true. And once Brian Stelter amplifies it, the web goes, oh, it's bin Laden, right? And it just goes like that. And I think within 3 to 5 minutes, people were like, okay, it's bin Laden. So the power there was a curator power. And I've seen this, like when Andy Carvin didn't cover Occupy because he covers Middle East, he's like a curator, he calls himself oral historian, which is not a bad word either, for Middle East uprisings. When he wouldn't cover Occupy, lots of activists were upset. And Andy was like, people, I work 7 days a week, 17 hours a day. I have 2 small kids and I have, I don't even have any extra time. He does work 7 days a week if you follow his Twitter feed. The reason Occupy people were upset was that without that curator power, they were more likely to be ignored because you have that last mile issue. How do you get to all power? I think New York Police Department and UC Davis Police Department realized we've got to solve this problem for them. Let's create some really nasty visuals of us beating up students and, just obviously unarmed protesters and create mainstream attention, which is what happened. Until those things happen, if you look at sort of the media coverage, until those things happen and it got mainstream media attention, you see sort of Occupy Movement, and I've been talking to a lot of people in it, people were getting a little like, okay, we're just going to fizzle out, and then there was a spike in response to, again, being hooked into media power. So it's this combination. The second case so if you look at Hot Dan case, the focusers in play are, you have the regular report, and newspapers started using this, and the curator in question was Brian Stelter from New York Times. You have the network who recognizes the value. You have the power of algorithmic focusers. I think Twitter's trending topics is a new player in that it's an algorithmic focuser. It tells you this is what's going on, and that's why it's such a valuable space, and that's why when something's not trending, a lot of people are like, we want it to trend, or people want something, there's all these constant accusations of, is it censoring, is it not? It's kind of complicated how it works. So that's a new power. And you had, Rumsfeld, ex-chief of staff, so you had all these in play. Now, my final case of focusers is one I've written about, so I'm not going to talk about this at length, but this is a friend of mine and an Egyptian-American writer. She was abducted in Egypt around the protests that started on November 19. And she was able to send out this tweet, beaten, arrested at the Interior Ministry by borrowing a cell phone of an activist who had gone in there to negotiate. Again, we saw this middle of the night in Egypt. And we started with Andy, we started a hashtag FreeMona. This is in my blog, so I'm not going to go at it at length, but I want to use one aspect of it. And FreeMona in 20 minutes was trending worldwide, which is kind of interesting. In 20 minutes, she's on Mohammed Mahmoud Street, she gets to tweet this out, and we have this sort of global attention. But of course, and we had a lot of reporters, and we had lots of people covering this, But this was a case where I knew Mona's an outspoken feminist. She's a very, very outspoken dissident in terms of being Googleable and very identifiable. So I thought, she's in pretty immediate danger. So we need to, again, find someone then, immediately. And I was in touch also with a lot of activists in Egypt. Like there's a great military trials organization. So there's a lot of people who were in Egypt who said, okay, tomorrow morning we'll go, we'll check all the police stations, we'll try to recover. So this wasn't just there was a lot of network connections. Again, I've written all about this, so I'm not going to go on long. But this is the part I want to highlight, is that we, again, had a last mile problem. How do you, because she had a US citizenship, right, she had this privileged position, and we're thinking, how can we use this privilege to try to get her out of here as soon as possible? And for that, you need the US State Department, and you have a last mile problem there. How do you get to the US State Department? I believe this was Sunday night. Well, I knew some people, and some people knew some people, and we also knew Anne-Marie Slaughter, who's a former advisor for innovation to Hillary Clinton, who's great on Twitter. So we were like, are you awake, Anne-Marie? And she's like, yes. And she was able to call and say, people pay attention to this now. And they were able to, and there's a whole backstory to this, to get to their contacts. So again, the last mile, right? This is very old power. This is like somebody with a US passport, and you have the US State Department acting, but you needed this link. So in Mona, you had all the steps going in. What this can create in terms of changing the, and again, sort of to end the story, Mona was out with only broken hands and sexual assault. So that's kind of like, this is to show you how brutal things can be in Egypt. We consider this a relatively good outcome, that she only had her hands broken and sexually assaulted, instead of all the other possibilities that we were thinking about. And the other things do happen to lots of people who don't necessarily have the same privileges as her, which is a global audience, a US passport, all of that, a platform. And that, yes, indeed, is a Pillsbury Doughboy t-shirt. That's, Sand Monkey, the blogger Sand Monkey is one of the people who wanted to get it. And Sand Monkey's a big guy, and he had this extra t-shirt for her, and so her picture's in this, I love me, freeze me, take me home. I think this is just hilarious after she's out. So, what this is creating, in many cases, is this really interesting phenomenon of the micro-celebrity citizen journalist activists. And they're not necessarily always as privileged like Mona, because Mona lives in New York. She's not from Egypt in the sense that she doesn't live there. So you think, well, with this, how does this work for, let's say, someone in Bahrain, which is an ongoing, very brutal crackdown? And we have these interesting cases of people that I think of. Well, maybe not. Angelina Jolie is my example of the, this sort of focusing power. She goes someplace and a zillion people follow her, and she uses that often to raise awareness. But think of someone like that and make them kind of a journalist, but not a Nick Kristof journalist. Again, kind of an activisty journalist, but an activist journalist. And what do you get? Well, you get Zeynep Al-Khawaja. And yeah, we have the same name, but Arabic, it's with a B and blah, blah. She tweets as Angry Arabia. It's really worthwhile following her. Her bio is something like, you want to know why Arabs are angry? Ask me, right? She's got this great Twitter feed, and she goes to every protest. She's from a very prominent family of dissidents. And at the moment, let's see, her husband's in jail, her brother-in-law's in jail, her father's in jail. They've all been tortured. Her father is sentenced to life and has his jaw broken 6 places and things like that. Her husband's trial is continuing. He's already got, I think, 4 years. And so it's his family. And she's out there all the time. And this turns to this. Often. This is her. A lot of times there's ongoing protests every day in Bahrain. And the amount of sort of resistance, the durability of the resistance, is something you might have missed if you're not following it through the alternative media, because it doesn't get covered as much. But this is a line of riot police on their way to a village, where there's a protest, and Zeynep al-Khawaja is, and the abaya is worn fairly commonly by the protesters in Bahrain, women protesters, even if they don't normally wear it. It's a way of establishing a different kind of power too. And she's there, standing in front of a line of riot police, making the victory sign and not moving. This is 2 days after Nicholas Kristof did go to Bahrain and interviewed her, so she's got even higher visibility at this point. And once this picture gets out, and this is a really interesting, I watched this in real time. So this picture's circulating, and there's a lot of questions about, well, what's happening to her. And I watched the media attaché of Bahrain in DC grumble about this online. So they knew this was going around. And there was, the police there said to arrest her, but they couldn't really arrest her because they didn't have enough female police, and she's now practicing sort of more active civil disobedience, she's not cooperating. So they dispatched female police to come drag her, but in the half an hour between this and the time that the female police got, and I watched this, and we have some back channel information. The Bahraini authorities were like, don't arrest her, because we don't want this picture in, tomorrow's New York Times. This is a powerful picture. So they didn't arrest her, but the riot police couldn't get past her either. Right? They either had to drag her or do something, and they didn't want more visuals. So this time she's like, I can't believe I'm not arrested. This is another protest where there's pictures like that, and she went there, and then they dragged her away this time. But they didn't know it was being filmed, because it's in the middle of a large area, but there was video of it, and everybody was sure, including her sister, who was in exile. She's going to get a couple years in jail, because in Bahrain you get a couple years. She was released once again. So it's kind of like, she's like this micro-celebrity activist. It's a complicated thing. She's hard to arrest for the Bahraini regime. But if you don't arrest her, she's a problem too. It's not like, she goes away. These sort of micro-celebrity activists, and I know a couple now, that have said that we weren't tortured because of this. I mean, Allah said this, that last time, Allah Abdel Fattah, who was Egyptian activist, he was jailed once in 2006 and also recently. In both cases, he said probably attention to his case might have had him kept longer, but not tortured. There was another recent case, Razan Ghazawi in Syria, and again, she said she wasn't tortured, most likely, in her opinion, because of this. And these are regimes where torture is so common. I mean, I don't know why else speak to that. The point isn't, though, and I want to make this obvious, the point isn't, oh, one person is spared torture, because these regimes will, there's lots of people they are torturing. So having, I'm not saying, it just solves a problem, because they will go and torture other people, they will go and kill other people. So you're not solving the problem of torture or the problem of killing of dissidents, because you cannot solve it like this. But what it does is create these people with these cocoon of some level of protection. It's not absolute, but some level of protection, who go everywhere with a camera in their hand. You see? So you're increasing the movement's capacity to document through these micro-celebrity activists. Again, I'm not saying this is a solution to these regimes torturing, because by definition, because of attention economy, there can only be so many of these people. Right? This kind of international attention, it's an unequal thing, it's an unfair thing, and in reality the way it works is, only a few people get this kind of visibility. What they can do then is to continue to be this sort of mixture of journalist and celebrity and activist. So, Rami said, even when he was in immigration, his Twitter feed was slammed by people that told him basically, whatever happens to you, we're not going to forget about this. And that's often very important, to know that you're not going to be locked in the kind of either linguistic or censorship pits that these regimes can create for you. And, Zeynep has this, little, by the way, lest anybody thinks this is easy, she has a 2-year-old daughter. So if she also gets arrested, which she does get arrested, she gets jailed, her husband's already in jail. And this is a huge, what's happening is at a great human cost. So these people have repeatedly said that this kind of media attention and hacking into old power and new power, this is how I interpret it, is a way for them to keep doing what they can do for their cause in a way that probably would have been very hard 10, 20 years ago. So this was my thing, but I want to add to the political part. You know, we need governments, political parties, and apparently sometimes sheiks to get that power of attention and this power of old media combined. And well, I guess top 10 is a really interesting world, the way these things are happening, and thank you.